everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be planning our winter sowing. A lot of people ask me about winter sowing. I got a lot of winter sowing videos, so I figured why not try to do like a complete guide to winter sowing. So I guess let's get on into this. If you're completely new to winter sowing, basically it's just kind of like putting stuff in bottles or seed starting outside. When it comes to starting seeds for the garden, it can definitely be frustrating if we don't have any grow lights or if we don't have any space. It gets real frustrating really quickly. And for me, that's kind of the necessity that led me to explore winter sowing to such a degree. Basically, when we sow things in the winter, we're not technically actively trying to start the seeds to grow them, through the coldest parts of the year. What we're actually kind of doing is we're just putting seeds out and getting them ready so that when the time is right, they will have, a place to grow, and they will start growing on their own and grow at their own speed and be ready at their own pace. So really, when we start winter sowing, we have kind of two options. We can start in soda bottles or milk jugs. That is the worst looking picture of a bottle I've ever seen in my life. Or we can start in a unheated low tunnel, which is what I personally like to do because it gives me more space. The more you grow and the more you start sowing seeds, the less realistic the milk jug and soda bottle thing becomes because you have like a bajillion of them. So this is why the hoop house is a good option for me. But when we get there, I'll show you how to do both methods so we'll be ready to go. The first thing we'll need to do is determine when we want to sow. When we start sowing will vary greatly depending upon your zone. I'm here in zone 6B7. For me, the best time for me to begin the process of winter sowing is usually around January 21st. The main reason I pick this date is it seems like, there's no sudden warm spells. In my garden, let's face it, there could be. But for the most part, the temperatures, the cold weather of the winter have stabilized by January 21st. So that's a good time to start a lot of my seeds. But it should be noted, it's not a good time to begin winter sowing all of my seeds. The first seeds that I'm going to start to winter sow, of course, are going to be things that have somewhat of a cold tolerance. Now this will vary obviously depending upon what you grow. So things like kale or cabbage or anything in the brassica family is usually a good choice. These are also really realistic because, these need a head start in the spring, especially somewhere that gets really warm really fast because, they're not going to grow as well if you don't get that head start. Also, hardy annual flowers. These are flowers that can handle a little bit of cold and are okay with a little bit of frost. So those are the first kinds of plants that I am going to start to winter sow. I'll get more into these a little bit later. Other plants you may have to wait. For example, my last frost date is usually about April, we'll say 28th is a good date. So things like marigolds and zinnias and tomatoes and things like that, I might need to wait a little bit longer before I winter sow them. Usually I like to winter sow things that are tender to frost about 4 weeks before the last frost date. Now, the size of the plant will vary because we only have, about 4 weeks there. And we will need to protect them, which I will get more into a little bit later in the video. It's totally possible to start tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and everything like that in this winter sowing technique. I've done it before in the past. A couple years ago, I grew like 50 tomato plants. They did great. The only real difference is they're a little bit smaller when you first plant them out, so it might not be ideal for people with a short summer climate, but here where I am, it works perfect. January is also a good time to winter sow a lot of perennial flowers. Now, perennial flowers can be absolutely notorious for learning how to germinate. This is because a lot of times when you have a perennial flower, it needs to go through a period of stratification, which if you're unfamiliar with that, I have a video about that. Just go to my search bar and type stratification on there and you should be able to find it. But this usually means a period of alternating cold or alternating wet, warm, whatever, to really trigger that seed to begin to germinate and to make sure that it's germinating at the right time. The thing about the winter sowing method is that seeds that are planted in these containers are naturally stratified, and they're going to naturally begin to grow when the time is correct. Seeds that aren't ready to grow, if they're just laying in their bottle, it should be fine. They can just sit there and wait till it's time to grow. So it's no big deal. That is one of the many reasons why I love winter sowing, is it takes all the guesswork away from me. I don't have to have a room full of seed trays in my house. Let's face it, I don't have the money for it. I don't have the space for it. So for our earliest sowings, we have things like our lettuce and snapdragons and things that can really kind of tolerate cold, cress, auroch, a lot of leafy greens. Spinach is another great one. Spinach is great for winter sowing. I know a lot of people recommend against transplanting spinach as well, but I personally do it. I haven't really had too much problem. In fact, I've had some of my best spinach plants from winter sowing. Moving on. Now, it should be noted, if you are into succession planting, you can do successions of each of these, and usually they will germinate at differing times. Sometimes they germinate all at once, but usually they kind of stagger. And when it comes to things like this, I continue planting these through February. So if you missed the planting window for January, you can always continue doing this to February. No big deal. So here in my zone, I like to begin to winter sow some of my more tender plants in March. Now, usually I wait till about the end of March to do this. The reason I wait till March is because the temperatures have noticeably began to warm quite a bit. And this is important because our plants are going to be in their little mini greenhouses, and we want it to be nice and warm and toasty in our little mini greenhouses that we have used for seed starting. So we have that really nice moisture and really nice humidity in our little seed starting environment, I guess. As I've already mentioned, things that I like to begin to winter sow in March, things like zinnias. Sunflowers are another great one, especially if you are growing sunflowers for cut flowers and you have, a special variety that doesn't have tons of seeds. Obviously, you can direct sow both zinnias and sunflowers, but winter sowing is a great option if you want to actively become more deliberate for growing those. Also, things like pumpkins and zucchinis and all that jazz if you are growing a vegetable garden. I know some people recommend against, starting pumpkin seeds and all that in containers, rather just going ahead and direct sow, but I actually always do that with my pumpkins, and they do really well. The reason is I like to have this jump start with the pumpkins because I can get them into the garden very early as soon as the soil is warm. Obviously, I don't want pumpkins sitting there in cold soil. But this head start helps me to kind of beat all of the insects, and that includes, squash vine borers and cucumber beetles, because the plants will already have that period of growth and be better established by the time they're actually getting into the garden. I mentioned tomatoes earlier and also peppers. I do give my tomatoes and peppers a little bit of special treatment here in March. About a week before I put them into my either unheated low tunnel or my bottles, I like to pre-sprout these two seeds. And the main reason I do this is because, it just makes germination a little bit quicker. We make sure the plants are already germinated, and they can get into that warm hoop house environment or the warm soda bottle environment, and they can just really start to begin growing immediately. This helps us get the best size transplants that we can. If you're unsure how to pre-sprout, go to my channel and type in sprouting tomatoes and peppers. I already have a video for it. So when we take into account these tender things that we are winter sowing, we will need to make sure that we are protecting them from frost. Now, in a lot of cases, the bottles, our little soda bottles or milk jugs or whatever, is more than enough protection for these plants to be okay when the temperature, dips to 32 degrees Fahrenheit or we have a light frost. However, in March, before my last frost date, there is still a chance that it could potentially get quite cold. So that's when I'm going to use a frost blanket to cover the containers or to cover the seedling trays. Frost blankets are relatively cheap, so investing in one is a pretty good deal, especially since you can use it over and over. As long as you get one that's a pretty good quality, there should be no problems. So if there is an expected frost or the temperature dips below whatever, what I do is I use my frost blanket and I drape my frost blanket over top of my bottles or over top of my seed trays, as we'll see a little bit later. It's going to get severely cold and you have these plants planted out already. You may even need to consider bringing them inside for the night just to make sure, just to keep them safe and protect them from the elements. But with all the things that I winter sow, it is very, very seldom that I bring anything inside indoors. Alright, so one of the main methods that I use to winter sow is using soda bottles. Now, a couple of years ago, I was collecting soda bottles. I was digging them out of garbage cans. I do not suggest that. I had roughly, I want to say maybe 250 soda bottles in my backyard, and somebody on Instagram says, "You do know that drinking all that soda is really bad for you." And I'm just like, did you even just not even listen to anything I just said? Whatever. Thank goodness this health coach / realtor stumbled upon my Instagram page, or I would have been sucking down 250 bottles of Coke a month. Okay, that's besides the point. Winter sowing is cost effective for a lot of people because it does use soda bottles or milk jugs. The key to selecting a container, there needs to be an opening in the top, like a pour spout. It also needs to be kind of clear. You don't want anything that's like super opaque. It can be like a kind of frosted clear, like a milk jug, but you really want to make sure it's something that light can get through. For example, if you have a bottle that's solid blue, that's not going to work because how is the light going to get through for the plants to grow? Also, color doesn't matter. Somebody tried to tell me that I couldn't use a green 2-liter bottle because green light wouldn't go through it. You know, I'm not a scientist, but I don't think that's how that works. But the plants in the green bottle, they grew just fine. There wasn't anything wrong with them. If you want to use a Sprite bottle, more power to you. You do you. So we've selected our bottle. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to put drainage holes in that. And if you're more of a visual learner, I have about 5 million, tons of them. Because for a long time, this is the method I used and this is all that I did. First thing we're going to do, we're going to put a couple drainage holes. I usually use a strong pair of snips. Be very careful. Plastics can be hard. They can be dangerous. I've seen people heat up screwdrivers and, melt holes in bottles with hot screwdrivers. That seems really dangerous. Just whatever method you choose, make sure you're comfortable with it and be careful and don't do anything reckless, I guess. After we have gotten our drainage holes, we are going to cut the bottle in half. This can vary depending upon what kind of bottle you have, of course, but the main key is that we want to leave a hinge. This hinge is going to let us open and close the bottles because on hot days, especially, in late spring when it's still not, frost free yet, but the days are getting warmer, we're going to want to pop those bottles open to get some ventilation in there so that our little seedlings don't cook to death. Anyway, once I have added the drainage and once I've cut it in half, I'm now ready to put some soil in. You can make your own potting mix, your own seed starting mix, buy a special mix. But what I simply do, what's the most cost effective here and what I have the most access to, is I grab a big old sack of potting soil and I begin filling that bottle halfway up with potting soil. Ideally, we want to have at least 4 inches of potting soil in each bottle. This will ensure that it's able to maintain moisture, and I'm going to plant my seeds, and this will vary, okay? It varies depending upon the type of seed you have, the size, the shape of the seed. For this information, you want to look on the back of your seed packet. In general, if seeds are teeny tiny, I surface sow them. If seeds are quite large, I usually cover them with a little bit of soil, just barely. It will vary depending upon the type, and you want to make sure you're reading the packet because some seeds do better with light to germinate, so you really want to pay attention to what you're doing there. I should have mentioned already that the soil that you're putting into these containers should be nice and moist. I don't know why people hate that word. This word does not bother me at all. Moist. Probably because when you say moist, it sounds like your mouth is moist, like moist. Ugh. Okay, never mind. That is pretty gross. Okay, so you want to make sure your soil has lots of moisture before you plant these seeds. Then you plant seeds, firm them into the soil, make sure they're coming in good contact with the soil. And we are going to take some tape and just wrap the tape around that cut that we made. We have taped it up, we're just going to move it outside and put it outside. What I like to do is I put it on a sidewalk just because that helps the drainage, nothing falls over. Generally that's a good place to put it. Keeps the animals out of it because mice and things can get in there and eat your seeds if you are not careful. You need to put it somewhere where it rains. You need to put it out in the weather. Don't put it under a carport or, you know, in a garage or anything. You need to put it out in the weather where it gets sun and it gets rain and snow and whatever else happens in your yard. That's where it needs to be. Also, you want to make sure it gets sun. So usually I put my bottles south facing. This is especially true when I'm starting those seeds that are hardy annuals in the coldest part of the winter. So we have a place where it rains and a place where it's south facing. I think the south facing is a little bit negotiable, but definitely want to make sure it has access to moisture. Some questions I get is, do I water it? And that answer is no, you don't water it. Well, you don't water it immediately. When temperatures are below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, I never water anything. In general, when the temperatures are cold, you're not going to need to water that as long as your soil has consistent moisture, you're not going to need to water that. However, the answer to that question is yes when spring comes, because in spring, once those temperatures are getting nice and warm, you're going to want to open up that container and make sure, you know, the plants are getting ventilation, make sure they're not getting too hot as they grow. So usually that leads to water loss. So when the temperatures begin to warm, I begin to watch that more closely and I water them if they look like they are drying out. When you actually begin to see growth in the containers will vary. Sometimes you'll see it fast, sometimes you'll see it within a week depending upon what you plant. Sometimes it might take months for the seeds to germinate. So if you don't see anything right away, don't panic. Just give it time, and when the temperatures are right and the weather is right, most things will start to grow. Another method that I like to use is a low tunnel. Now, if you are unfamiliar with low tunnels, basically they're metal hoops and you bend them, and then the metal hoops are covered with plastic. I use a 6 mil plastic sheeting. Now, this isn't greenhouse sheeting or anything like that. This is just some regular old cheap clear plastic that I got from the home improvement store, okay? Not anything fancy. To make the low tunnels, I bought a low tunnel bender from Johnny's Seeds. I think it was $59, okay? So, a little bit of investment here, but let's consider we can use the low tunnel bender forever. Okay, we can make low tunnels, we can overwinter stuff, we can overwinter kales and lettuces and all kinds of things. And we can make unlimited seed starting space with this $59. So you can buy a grow light, which I mean might be more than $59 in a lot of cases if you're growing a lot of stuff. Or we can just buy a low tunnel bender that is going to help us to start our seeds outside. So basically what I am doing, instead of making all these thousands of soda bottles that I have, I am just bending hoops and I'm putting them into the ground. Look at these drawing skills. I'm practically an artist. There's the ground. And I'm taking this 6 mil plastic sheeting and I'm covering the hoops with it. To secure the plastic sheeting, I'm using landscape fabric pins to secure it to the ground, like so. And to keep the actual plastic into place, I'm using 1/2-inch PVC clamps. So they're just clipping on here, like so. Usually put about 2 of them on each rail. This is one of those things, there's a million options how to do it, but that's just how I do it, so I thought I would share it with you. So the other things we are going to need are seed trays. I use the mesh bottom seed trays. You can use cell seed trays if you want. The reason I use the mesh bottom cell trays is I used to think I was going to start using soil blockers, but I don't really like soil blockers. Don't tell anybody else, because I feel like the entire gardening community will shun me for not liking soil blockers. But they're just too time consuming in my opinion. I really prefer these mesh bottom trays because it allows the soil to be in one large, sheet. This sheet really helps with keeping the trays moist. Shell trays, which just have individual, different little cavities, I guess. I don't know, cells, duh. They dry out really fast when we put them in a low tunnel. It can be done, but you do, in the springtime, you really have to watch the watering with cell trays. These mesh trays are a lot more forgivable. That's why when you see me filling up seed starting trays, you'll see me with a mesh tray. Just put a piece of paper in the bottom of the mesh tray. That'll biodegrade, no big deal. And then we fill it up with soil and start my seeds accordingly. I'm just going to grab some potting soil that I've watered very well, fill it up with a tray, sow my seeds, either surface sow them or cover them up, again, depending upon what the package says. And I am just going to slide them into my unheated low tunnel and close it. Ventilation needs on this will vary. Usually on hot days, if it's getting super hot in the springtime and I still got some stuff in there, I'll pop these ends open like so, or I'll pop the entire side of it open and clip it up just so we get nice ventilation. But during the coldest parts of the winter, I really don't need that ventilation because, I want to keep the heat trapped in there when it's like, I don't know, 12 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Basically, it's the exact same process of using the milk jugs and the winter sowing bottles, but on a larger scale. Last year, I was able to start 43 trays of seedlings in my unheated low tunnel. That's no grow lights, no anything, just the sun and a little bit of good luck, I guess. And they did exceptionally well. They did great. That's one of the main reasons I want to continue sharing this with other people, is because I feel like when it comes to seed starting, there's so much information on how to start them under grow lights. And you know what? I feel like the use of grow lights is such a privilege. I can't afford that. I don't got space for that. What, you want me to put 3,000 plant trays in my kitchen on my dining room table? Nah, sorry, it ain't gonna happen. I mean, let's face it. Almost anybody is going to have access to a soda bottle. I really like that winter sowing makes this accessible to so many people. I'm sure there are tons of variations and tons of climates where winter sowing might not work or might not be ideal, but I also know for a fact that winter sowing can be a real game changer for a lot of people depending upon your growing zone. I should also mention that just like in our winter sowing bottles, you may need to protect your seedlings in the tunnel from frost. This can be done usually with just a light frost blanket, just like we did with the other ones. It's pretty much no big deal. And that's really about it. Winter sowing can be so incredibly easy. If you have any questions, tell me down below in the comments. I'd love to help you because I really am passionate about this because it opens so many doors. The only thing left to do is transplant when the time is right into your yard. Obviously, the things like the hardy annuals and the greens and everything, misspelled that, and the greens and everything can go first. Usually I like to plant those about, 4 weeks before my last frost date. I'll put those out into the yard. Obviously, things that are tender to frost, they need to wait longer. They need to wait till after your frost date. We still have to respect the frost date. But otherwise, it allows you to get a great head start, a great jump start, allows you to establish very healthy, very strong, very sturdy and robust seedlings. And part of that, since they have been grown outside, there's no need. When you transplant, you don't have to harden them off. They're already hardened off. They've been growing outside. They've been exposed to the wind and the sun and everything, and they can handle it. Overall, I just think winter sowing contributes to such a healthy garden, and I am a huge fan of it. As always, let me know your questions or concerns down in the comments. Love to hear from you. Always looking to learn new stuff from you guys. I hope that you are having such an amazing day, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye, guys. Hey guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the video, and if you want to support the channel, please consider buying one of our soaps or wax melt boxes. We have a couple of options. For example, the combination wax melt soap gift box